Greetings, we are in Senior English 8. And our objective now for the hour is to continue our conversation in regards to Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. Only now we're going to make a conscious shift or move away from the general prologue, the introduction of all those main characters, to now specifically the tales of Canterbury Tales, the stories. Three things we want to say. One, each of the tales involves two parts always. Two parts. Part one, an introduction. Only he didn't call it an introduction, he called it a prologue. Now don't confuse this with the general prologue. The general prologue is, hey, I was hanging out at this bar. This group of people came in on their way to go on pilgrimage to Canterbury. They invited me along. Let me tell you about all the people that were a part of this group. I'll list every one of them. He does that. Then, oh yeah, the host said, let's play this game where we all tell stories. I'm basically going to be telling these stories. End of general prologue. Then, in the actual Canterbury Tales, you have a number of those characters, not all, but a number of those characters telling stories. Before they get to the story, they don't call it a story, they call it a tale, T-A-L-E. But before they get to the story, they introduce themselves. They stand up in front of the rest of the group and they say, let me tell you a little bit about myself. This is who I am, this is what I do. Then at the end of the prologue, specific to the person, then you have some kind of tale or story that is told. Number two, there is a definite relationship between the prologue that each will give, the introduction, and the actual story. We're going to see this right away with the story of the Pardoner's Tale. There is a relationship that Chaucer is creating. Okay? And we always want to identify that relationship has something to do with Chaucer's project. You want to write this down now. Chaucer's project. Now for your paper, you're going to write on the topic, Chaucer's use of satire to reach his intended audience. Say it again. Chaucer's use of satire, S-A-T-I-R-E, to reach his intended audience. There's two things here we want to focus on. One, Chaucer and the use of satire. Say one thing, mean something else. You look at your pal dressed up in some garment and you say, oh, boy, that looks like a great outfit you've got on. And she immediately knows you are not complimenting her, you are insulting her, right? She said you looked great, but you're aware that's not really what you mean. What you really mean is, I look like garbage, I should go change. Got me? That's what we mean by satire. But we're also interested in the second part. Chaucer has an agenda. A-G-E-N-D-A. Agenda. And this agenda has to do with him making his point to a specific audience. And we want to begin to identify, who is this audience that Chaucer is so interested in? We know that he chose to write the Canterbury Tales in this new language called English. And he does choose to write in English. And you'll remember earlier we had Mr. Paulson trying to read that language. It's kind of difficult to be able to hear it read by a student. But notice earlier when we had it read by a professional reader, it made quite a bit of sense. I mean, you could figure out most of those words, even though they were pronounced a little bit differently from the way we pronounce them. But who is he trying to reach? This audience of his. So that's the second thing we're always looking at. Number three, I told you three things. One, each of these characters have an introduction. Two, the introduction of the prologue goes with the story and has something to do with Chaucer's intended project. Three, there is a dramatic quality to these prologues. A dramatic quality. I don't mean 8th grade drama. But what I do mean is, Chaucer wants you in your mind's eye, your imagination, to imagine that one person stands up in front of the rest of the group and starts to introduce himself or herself. And there's all kinds of tension that we're going to see happening as this unfolds. Because we know who's in the entourage. Let me give you a classic example of this. Here in a second, the partner is going to stand up, and he's going to say, let me tell you how I rip people off by preaching. It is amazing. I love it. I can make so much money because these people are complete fools. They will believe anything you tell them, and they will pay me lots and lots of money. It's wonderful. But while he's doing this, you can imagine that there's a couple of people sitting there listening to him, part of the entourage, who would maybe have a thing or two to respond. What do you imagine the Sumner would be saying? As the partner goes on, he will tell us at the end he's been drinking a little too much. His tongue gets looser as his little drinking buzz starts. And by the end of his introduction, he is saying some stuff like, I don't care at all about saving people's souls. They don't go to hell and pick blackberries for all I care. What I care about is going to a town, finding a bar, and hooking up with a chick. That's what I like. This is the partner. Now, while he says this, you can imagine what the Sumner might be doing. What would the Sumner be doing? Think about it. What would the Sumner's not going to say anything. He's sitting there listening with the rest of the entourage. But what would the Sumner? We know he's with the partner. Remember? That's part of his project. He goes out and catches people in sin, brings them in front of the partner. The partner makes money. They pay him for him to forgive their sins. And together they're making... Can you imagine what the Sumner's doing? He's doing one of these numbers, right? Like, dude, would you just shut up? You're ruining our project here, right? That's maybe what the Sumner's doing. But when the partner goes off the way he's about to go off, what do you imagine that the good parson might be doing? Remember, what did we learn about the good parson when we studied with Miss Laird? He's a good guy, isn't he? Remember, we said that first he participates in the actions of a good Christian, and then he preaches. Remember? Right? Christ's and his lore he taught, but first he followed it before. Remember? In other words, he practiced what he preaches. Can you imagine what the parson maybe is saying when the partner goes off like this? Right? He's doing one of these numbers like, see, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong right here. Guys like this, they're ruining the reputation for everybody in the church, blah, 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 blah. You see it? Right? So this is what I mean by this dramatic quality. Let me give you an example. The wife of Bath. We're going to hear a lot about her. She's a very fascinating creation. She's standing in front of all these men, and who are the other women in the entourage? Who are the only other women in the group? They're nuns, and we're told they're good nuns, which means what about them? No hanky-panky, right? No hanky-panky. If you're a good nun, no hanky-panky, right? That is to say they follow the life of celibacy. They don't hanky-panky, right? The wife of Bath steps up and says, let me tell you about women. All women know this. She does her hand towards the nuns. All women know this. Women want sex as bad as men. They just have to pretend like they don't. Am I right or am I right, ladies? She says this to the nuns. Yeah, you can imagine. Those poor little nuns are sitting there just going like really beat red, right? Okay. This is what we mean. This is what we mean by the dramatic quality of these texts, all right? In other words, there is a tension that will sometimes come up. And we're going to see this right away when the partner steps up. Let's now turn to the partner, one of Chaucer's greatest creations. And we're going to look now at this cat, and we're going to point out right away that Chaucer is going to be engaged in a very identifiable project or agenda. Let's say it out loud. I'm helping you already to write your paper. For those of you who are taking notes to write this paper, let's say it now. Chaucer's first project or agenda is he has serious difficulties with the hypocrisy of the Roman Catholic Church. He doesn't like the fact that there is a lot of corruption. That's an important word. You want to write that in your notes. A lot of corruption within the church. Now again, just to remind, if we're talking 1300, we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church. There is no other church. For those of you who were raised going to church, and it wasn't a Catholic institution, you were raised a Protestant. The Protestant movement happens later as a protest movement, that's where we get the word, from the Roman Catholic Church. Who kickstarts that Protestant movement primarily? A cat named Martin Luther, which is why one or two of you maybe even have gone to a church with the name Luther on the actual church. Those groups are called Protestant groups, okay? We are talking pre-Reformation, before the reform of the Catholic Church and the Protestant protest movement. So, everybody's in the church that we call the Roman Catholic Church. Everybody is engaged in this on some level. It is Are you ready for this academic term? The church is ubiquitous. By that we mean they have total influence, right? In other words, nobody is allowed to say, I'm not a part of the church. Wait, wrong answer. Everybody's involved on some level, okay? Chaucer's problem is that the people who have the power in the church, many, not all, how do we know not all? How do we know not all? How do we know that Chaucer is not opposed to all clergy? He has a good person. Good, yeah, he has a good person. But many of his religious in this entourage are corrupt. They find ways to use the church to make money. And the classic example of this is the partner. The partner will get to his story. But first he's going to introduce himself. I'm with you now on 125 of your hymnal, page 125. My lords, he said, in churches where I preach, I cultivate a haughty kind of speech and ring it out as loudly as a bell. I've got it all by heart, the tale I tell. I have a text that always is the same, it always has been since I learned the whoa. Right away, you're already taking notes, aren't you? Look what he calls preaching. He calls it a game. Right away, he's going to come right out. He's drinking his beer. He's going to say that by the end of this prologue. He's drinking his beer, and he already comes out and says, hey, the story I tell, the tale I tell, I got it all by heart. It's beautiful. I love to play the game. Old as the hills, fresher than the grass. And then he's going to use a Latin phrase, read your footnote, greed or the love of money is the root of all evil. He says, I love to preach against greed. Now, what is greed? Wanting stuff that you really probably don't need, right? Usually we think of it in terms of money, right? Wanting money. Already, you can write down then something that's kind of ironic. Notice we've only gone 6 lines or 7 lines into his prologue. What's going to be ironic? Knowing what you know about this partner from the general prologue, what is the one thing he likes to do? Make money. Be greedy. Note the irony. What is the irony?
He preaches.
Right. He preaches against the very thing that he himself likes to do the most. Be greedy, right? The partner now will explain how he introduces himself to a congregation. Hey guys, do you see this little break here? The reason there's a break is because there's a whole lot more of this prologue specific to the partner that your textbook company cannot include. The reasons is because pretty quickly it gets kind of disturbing. And religious people even today do not like the fact that Chaucer created a person who would say some of the things that he would say. Let me just say it this way. Whatever offends you going forward, what's marked out is worse. What they haven't given to you in the book is worse, okay? It's worse than that. And trust me, if you're at all have religious proclivities or tendencies, you're going to be offended by some of the stuff he's about to say. Look at what he says. Then, priest-like in my pulpit with a frown, are you reading with me? I stand, and when the yokels have sat down, I preach as you have heard me say before, and tell 100 lying mockeries more. Whoa. 2 things here. What is a yokel? You want to write that word down. What is a yokel? He says, I love to preach to the yokels. That's it. Yokels are stupid people. They are ignorant people. You got me. They are the people who don't really know very much. They're kind of dumb. And he says, they're the ones I really like to preach to. How come? I can tell, what's he say? 100 lying mockeries. Whoa! So he just comes right out and says it. I love to lie to these people because they're too stupid and they don't understand. They don't understand. They think everything I'm saying is truthful. It's wonderful, he says. Keeps going. I take great pains in stretching out my neck. To east and west I crane about and peck just like a pigeon sitting on a barn. My hands and tongue together spin the arm, and all my antics are a joy to see. The curse of avarice and cupidity. 2 words we want to write down because they're vocab words for us. Greed, =, avarice, =, cupidity. Do you got me? Greed, =, avarice, =, cupidity. All mean the same thing, desiring stuff that really you don't need. That's greed. He says, I love to preach against this stuff because I can make the stupid yokels feel guilty. And then guess what? They pay me back. It's a sweet gig he's got. He calls it a what? Early on he called it a game. A game. Yeah. Notice he continues. He says, the curse of avarice and cupidity is all my sermon, for it frees the health. Did you see that line? Now, hello. I told you earlier, in an earlier lecture, you'll remember. What if Mr. Short, I believe I used as the example, woke up one morning and said, I want to know about these people of 1300, 1350 in London. One of the things that he only is going to learn here in a text like this is the following. These people of this time, they're no banks. No banks. All money is coinage, no paper money. It's all coinage. Got me? No banks. So whatever money you have, you keep it at home in a safe or a coffer where there's only one key. The key worn on usually a necklace around the neck. Obviously, for obvious reasons, safety, right? Only one person gets the key, by the way. It is the man of the house, not the woman. We'll get to that with the wife of back. That's a major fight. We'll get to that. But what happens when you have to take your money out in public? Well, you're afraid you're going to get it stolen if you just put it inside of a little tiny bag. So what we're told they do is they have a belt that they wear. It's cloth. And when you lay it out on a table, you unfold it. You put your coinage down the center. You fold it, you pick it up, you wrap it around yourself as a belt. That way you don't get robbed. This thing that goes around you is called a pelf. He says, I love to preach against greed because it frees the pelf. Means what? That's right. They pull out the MasterCard or the Visa card. That's right. In other words, I love to preach against greed because immediately they start undoing their pelf, taking out their money, their coinage, and they're going to give it to me. Why are they going to give it to him? Why are they going to give him their money? To make themselves feel pardoned of what? What sin? Their greed, right? Their greed. In other words, he says, I love to preach to yokels. They're kind of stupid idiot types, and they'll believe the stories that you tell them, and then they feel guilty, and then they pay me the money. It's wonderful. Keep going. Look what he says next. This will blow your mind. This is a priest, for crying out loud. Last line of 125. For my exclusive purpose is to win, and not at all to castigate their sin. Once dead, what matter how their souls may fare? They can go blackberrying for all I care. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did you just read? What did this priest just say? The only thing I care about is what? Making the money off of them. Once they're dead, they can go to hell and go blackberry picking for all I care.
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care. Let's write that down. He doesn't care. Well, we would say it this way. He cares about what?
Money.
He cares about money. Does he care about the people and their souls? See, at this point, you can imagine that parson is going, see, this is why people don't believe in the church. Right here. This is it. Right here. We have a word for this. It's called what? Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. To be a hypocrite means what? Say one thing, do something else. You got it. To be a hypocrite. Believe me, keep going now. Many a sermon are devoted to excurum issues from an evil motive. Some to give pleasure by their flattery and gain promotion through hypocrisy. Some out of vanity, some out of hate, or when I dare not otherwise debate, I'll put my discourse into a shape. My tongue will be a dagger. No escape for him from slandering falsehood shall be there. If he has hurt my brethren or me, for though I never mention him by name, the congregation guesses all the same from certain hints that everybody knows. And so I take revenge upon our foes and spit my venom forth while I profess holy and true or seeming holiness. Now you can tell by this point he's probably drunk a little too much. How come? How can you tell that? He is giving away way too much. He is saying, I seem holy, and I am totally, he'll say later, vicious. He'll even use the word. But let me briefly make my purpose plain. I preach for nothing but for greed of gain, and use the same old text as bold as brass. And then again, the Latin phrase is going to be presented for us, right? Redu milore me cupitus. In other words, the love of money is the root of all evil. And thus I preach against, look what he says, fascinating, note the irony. Thus I preach against the very vice I make my living out of, avarice. Uh-oh, what's avarice mean? Greed. What's the other word? C word? Cupidity. Cupidity. All means the same thing, right? Avarice. Look at what he says next. And yet, however, guilty of that sin myself, with others I have power to win them from it. I can bring them to repent, but that is not my principal intent. Covetousness is both the root and stuff of all I preach. That ought to be enough. Well, then I give examples thick and fast from bygone times, old stories from the past. A yokel mind loves stories from of old, being the kind it can repeat and hold. What? Do you think as long as I can preach and get their silver for the things I teach, that I will live in poverty from choice? That's not the counsel of my inner voice. No, he says, look at it. No, let me preach from kirk to kirk. That means church to church. And never do an honest job of work. No, nor make baskets like St. Paul to gain a livelihood. I do not preach in vain. There's no apostle I would counterfeit. I mean to have money, wool, and cheese, and wheat, though it were given me by the poorest lad or poorest village widow. Though she had a string of starving children all agape. No, let me drink the liquor of the grape and keep a jolly wench in every town. Whoa. Whoa. Can you believe? I mean, here it is. It's just coming right out, right? I mean, he's just saying it. I can care less about saving souls, but boy, oh boy, do I like to have a good brewski at a bar and make sure I have a wench or a girl. Whoa. This is a preacher. This is a priest. And again, one more time, you can imagine the Sumner. He's going, seriously, dude, what are you doing? You're like, you're screwing up our ride here, okay? Once you tell them...
Aren't they the yolks, though, so they're still in there?
Well, see, this is a fine point. We're going to get to this thing about his second time. He uses the word yokel. He says yokels are so stupid, they don't get it, they don't know. But listen, gentlemen, to bring things down to a conclusion, would you like a tale, a story? Now as I've drunk a draught of corn-ripe ale, we can tell that he's been drinking. By God, it stands to reason I can strike on some good story that you all will like. Look what he says next. For though I am a wholly vicious man, vicious, good or bad?
Bad.
Really bad. Don't think I can't tell moral tales. I can. Here's one I often preach when out for wedding. Now, please be quiet. Here is the beginning. By the way, why would he have to tell them to be quiet, do you imagine? Again, the dramatic quality. Why would he maybe have to tell them, shh, shh, you guys, shh. Right, obviously he's upset. A few of the people sitting out there who are like talking like, are you serious? This guy's a preacher? Are you kidding? Right? Now let's make an observation or two. First of all, let's say two things here for your notes. Two things. One of the obvious questions that comes from a study of this prologue of the Partner is this question. I want you to write it down. I want you to think a little about it. It goes like this. Can you separate message from messenger? Or in your mind, are they the same thing? Let me give you an example. The father saying to the son, as the father is smoking, says to the son, you should not smoke. The father is smoking. And he says to his boy, you should not smoke. Question. What's the message? What's the message? Don't smoke. Who's the messenger? The father, who is smoking. Question. In your mind, can you separate message from messenger? Or for you, are they the same thing? Dude, if the messenger is smoking, he can't tell, right? He can't tell the kid not to smoke, because the kid's just going to look at him and go, you're telling me not to smoke? Dude, you're smoking. Right? In your mind, do you feel like you can separate the two? Or are you inclined to say, it's not the way the real world works? The messenger and the message kind of go together. Look what he just said. For though I am a wholly vicious man, good or bad? Bad. Don't think I can't tell moral tales. I can. In other words, he says, even though I'm a really bad guy, even though I'm a hypocrite, I still can tell a story that will win your soul. My message is different from me, the messenger. He wants to separate the two. It begs a really intriguing question going forward as you start to think about the potentiality of ever being a parent. When your kid asks you many years from now about stuff you did when you were his or her age, do you tell the truth? Or do you go, no, I never did that?
Tell them the truth.
See? Now, of course, the question is, if you tell them the truth, does that then give them license to do the same? In other words, it removes your capacity to say not to do it. Because your kid can say, well, you can't tell me not to do it. You did.
So that's when you say, well, I'm the parent.
I'm the parent. Right. I learned from my mistakes. There you go. Question number 2. All right, here we go. Question number 2. Let's write this one down. This text raises not only the question of separating a message and messenger, it also raises this question. This is a very disturbing one. How about this? Is Chaucer doing us a favor by showing us a corrupt priest? Or rather, is he doing something very dangerous by subverting, going underneath the authority of the church? Think about this for a moment. Who is Chaucer's audience, intended audience with this prologue? This introduction to the pardner? Well, you could say that he's trying to reach the church people. That's a possibility. But let's really think about it. Who really is he trying to reach? He used the word twice. You got it. Those yokels. Now think about this for a second. If you're a yokel who totally believes in the church, you go to Mass every day, you look at the priest at the front and you totally believe in that priest. Got me? Totally believe. Then you read this story about a partner who says out loud, I'm a complete idiot. I'm a complete hypocrite. I'm a complete vicious person. The next time you go to church and the priest steps up in front and says, okay, ready for donations, start paying the money. What are you going to think when you see? See how this works? It starts to undermine your ability to completely believe, right? From this point on, right? If you've been a true believer, you can go to church and look at the person speaking, but what's sitting in the back of your mind? What don't you know about him? You got it. You don't know what he's like in real time, in real ways. Now all of a sudden you begin to doubt. Question: what about somebody who's really, really well loved in our community? And you find out something about him or her that's really bad. Do you tell or do you not tell? Okay? Do you tell or do you not tell? Right? Let me give you a classic example for your notes. I'm making a 3A observation. The great writer Hawthorne writes a famous novel called Scarlet Letter. Some of you are familiar with it. There she is, Hester, standing on the stage in the middle of the town. She has a child in her arms, on her chest a scarlet letter A for adultery. She has slept with a man. She has had a child with this man. Now the town wants to know, who is the man you slept with? And she says, no. The priest of the town stands there and says to her, you will tell us who this man is. And she says, no. He says, I command you to tell this town who this man is. So both you and the man can be punished, not just you alone. And she says, no. She loves him, and she won't tell. Of course, the novel will unfold to tell us that the father of the child is the priest standing right there in front of her saying, tell. And she says, no. Later in the novel, we find out why Dimmesdale, the Reverend, won't tell. This is his argument. He says, I am a preacher. Everyone looks to me to believe in God. If they find out I'm the Father, some of those people could lose their faith and therefore go to hell and lose their soul. I cannot tell. He says, will go to hell because of the decision I made. But I don't want other people to go with me, therefore I don't tell. By the end of the novel, of course, well, I'll let you read it on your own to find out how it is. It's a fascinating end to a story. One of the more remarkable endings to a novel. When he can't live with himself anymore. Here's the question. Is Chaucer doing us a favor by showing us a corrupt priest? Or rather, is he hurting the ability to have faith in the institution of the church? Let's put it this way in our notes. Many people saw Chaucer's portrayal of this pardoner as very dangerous, as anti-authoritarian, authority of the church being questioned. the beginning of skepticism and doubt. People may be starting to go to church going, yeah, I heard about this priest once, this guy. I mean, there may be more. There probably are more of them. How do I know if this guy isn't one of those guys too? By the end of the partner's tale, his buzz will be over. He isn't drunk anymore. And he's going to be preaching, and he will have totally forgotten that he already admitted he's a complete hypocrite. As he will say to the rest of the entourage at the end of his sermon, by the way, good news, I'm along for the ride, and there's a bunch of you who probably need to be forgiven for sins. Why don't you step up and pay me some money? And why don't we start with the host, because he's obviously the one most enveloped in sin. He's the one that runs the whorehouse that we started from. Remember? The tavern close beside the bell. Let's go ahead and have the host come up and pay me some money. The host says, are you kidding me? I'm not paying you anything. The next thing you're going to tell me is that your underwear is sacred or something. I got to kiss that. And the host says that, and the partner gets mad. He's like, how dare you talk to a man of the cloth that way? And it's the knight, we're told, who steps up and says, boys, come on, settle down. Let's all have a little bit of fun here instead of getting into a fight. And then Chaucer tells us, on they go. Now to the tale. We're going to meet the tale tomorrow. We're going to ask a simple question. What is the relationship between the famous partner's tale and the partner's prologue? If you come to class having read the tale, you'll be able to answer that right away. We'll spend time tomorrow then with partner's tale. Thank you.